Right now, still some things to play out. What's your takeaway?
Well, thinking about the macro, as I'm sitting here in London and discussing this with global investors and corporates, there were some interesting surprises, right? I actually love it when there are surprises. First of all, it was a bad night for the polling industry. I don't want to talk about palm reading and astrology. That would be harsh, but it does seem like it might be more than a temporary blow to the polling aggregators and to the whole industry that's really sprung up, which seems to firmly not have captured the race. Having said that, anybody like me who's dealing with this data and looking at it would have said and did say before, all of these big races that we're talking about were very much within the polling error range. So it's a caution to investors who are looking for a clear narrative. We don't have a clear narrative coming out of these midterms. I think for global viewers, they're going to breathe a sigh of relief in that it doesn't look like a lot of drama coming out of U.S. politics. Political theater, yes. But big drama, perhaps not as much as feared.
How about the Senate? Looks NBC News calling the House for the Republicans. The Senate, we got still 4 races that are outstanding. We may not know until December 6th if there is a runoff in Georgia, and that determines actually the deciding vote. And of course, then we'll see what Joe Manchin does. As you're meeting with investors, and for our global viewers and audience, based on what we know now, is there any significant policy change that will impact the American markets, the global markets, the bond markets?
Policy impact is one thing. I think most observers that I'm talking to in the sort of global investment market are very concerned about failure to raise the debt ceiling, which is coming up again in December. And let's remember that this is a newly weaponized policy option. So, having seen what we did here in the UK with the big market sell-off after the so-called mini-budget, I think there's a big question about whether markets will, especially bond markets, will be so forgiving if Republicans resort to this weapon again. So the debt ceiling is one key issue. The biggest point of relevance for global corporates and investors is, of course, U.S. foreign policy. And here is where we Americans, can go back to Civics 101, which I don't think is actually taught anymore, Brian, is it?
I
just
be. By the way, it
dated
should be.
Myself.
Should be.
Absolutely should be. We would have a lot fewer problems if it still was. But the legislative branch doesn't control everything. And so we had a lot of, loud voices, particularly from MAGA Republicans about, cutting aid to Ukraine and this sort of thing. Those comments definitely got attention here in Europe and globally, but I don't see them actually materializing. So on this front, there are a lot of things still to digest about the midterms, but to answer your question, no side has enough power to make big changes, and for financial markets, that's usually good news.
It probably maybe is good news, although with the GOP likely controlling the House, that's the NBC News projection. Would a debt ceiling fight, yet another one, because we've had a number of them in the last decade or so, would a debt ceiling fight be a net negative for the markets?
I think that it's a concern given the much weaker monetary, fiscal, economic policy backdrop. And that's what I was referring to with the UK point. There's just less room for maneuver and for these kind of, political theatrics in an environment where the Fed is less accommodating. In other words, the costs may actually be more than Republicans have bargained for. But for now, they're just going to savor their victory, and it sounds like rain down subpoenas on the White House.